evening and welcome again to National Federation of the Blind, NFB Flint, Genesee County Chapter. We're here again at the beautiful Genesee District Library. And with my host, as you know, this is Leo, aka Father Time, and Felicia, blink them eyes Bradford. You want to say a few words before we get started?
No, let's just welcome everyone and tune in.
Well, today we have a very special guest with us, and we're doing a Zoom this time. What does Zoom stand for anyway?
They just call it Zoom, just Zoom.
Well, we're going to zoom right into our special guest, Mike Powell. He was the National Federation of the Blind president one time for how many years?
6 years in Michigan. I wasn't the national president. I was the state president.
Oh, I'm sorry, the state president. You fooled me because of your talent.
Oh, that's true.
But yeah, he's got a lot of good information. Now he's a board member, and he also works with the recruiting efforts for the Federation of the Blind. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Mike?
Okay, well, my background. Well, let's see. I was born premature, and that was the result of my blindness because they didn't know in the early 50s, late 40s that certain premature babies were being blinded by too much oxygen in the incubator. So I was 3 pounds 10 ounces. I was supposed to be born 4th of July, my mom said, and I was born April 18th. So I always tell her I picked Paul Revere's ride instead of the actual Revolutionary War, but I was still born in the same war. So it was kind of there was a lot of children that were born in that time period. And rather than build other residential schools for the blind, they decided that if they did that, by the time a lot of these children would become 18, there'd be too many blind schools and might not be enough to fill them because blindness is a pretty low incidence disability. So they started to incorporate training programs within the public schools. So I was schooled in the special ed department of Detroit, and I got to go to regular classes, and we had a resource room where we had a Braille teacher, and we learned our Braille skills, learned our travel skills. Then when we got to be 18, then when we got older, we went to have a college prep program with the rest of the state of Michigan for those who were college bound. We got training in more cane travel, crossing streets and preparing for college. I got a degree from Eastern. Yes, sir.
You know something? I don't mean to cut you off, but you really said something interesting that caught my ear. You were talking about what resources that you had back in the 50s and 60s, and it sounds like it's such a big difference now that we're in the 2000s. It's been a lot of changes since then, or has it gotten worse?
Well, it depends on how you look at it. When it was isolated, you had one Detroit school system everybody worked through, not with individual school districts doing it. Each district does whatever it can do. So unfortunately, when it got decentralized, when you had one school for the blind in Michigan, in Lansing, and then that closed, and then you had the school in Flint, which is a school for the blind and the deaf. Things kind of got a little decentralized, and unfortunately, in the school systems, there are less children that read Braille now than there were when I was growing up.
I wonder, is that because of they really don't look at blind kids as a resource anymore? I think
part of it is the technology. They think, well, if we give them a recorder or something that technology they can learn quicker. And unfortunately, a lot of the education fields, a lot of people aren't going into education of the blind. For a while, they had a pretty big program at Wayne State University. Michigan State had one. Even Eastern, when I graduated from Eastern, had a little bit of a special ed program.
What year was that, Mike?
Well, when the law passed that said everybody has a right to be educated in their home districts, which I can see from the point of view of the parents, because all the parents didn't want to send their kid away. There's advantages and, of course, disadvantages to that, just like there's advantages and disadvantages to residential school versus public school. Mm-hmm. That was all around in the 70s, right about the time I started to get involved in the Federation when I was in college, like in 73, 74, with the Rehabilitation Act that said every blind person had the right had the right to rehabilitation skills. Unfortunately, they don't set a standard. So basically states say, well, any training you give somebody is good enough, and they don't necessarily set a high standard as to what constitutes excellence. And that's the real problem, I think, that's in the field of special education.
You know, when you were talking about that, I was just thinking about some of the problems that we have now as for blind people. And what I found out since I've been into the last 5 or 6 years, that there's not a lot of resources. And one of the biggest resources that I really found was the Federation. Once I got involved with them, there was a lot of avenues that opened up. Since you've been with the Federation, how has things changed from when you first started and just over the last 10 years or so?
Well, I would say the Federation for me was blind people deciding how we wanted to be seen by the world, not take the view from the seeing person's perspective. So we kind of go against the grain, and we say that a person, we define a blind person not by the amount of vision a person has. We say a blind person is essentially a normal person who can't see. I mean, if I were to take the eyesight away from everybody that can see, they wouldn't be blind people. They would be sighted people deprived of their sight because they still think like a seeing person. They haven't had training, they haven't had experience. And the Federation more or less says if you're a normal blind, you're a normal person who cannot see, you should be able to live the life you want. You may have to invest more in that life so that you can mitigate any negative effects of blindness, but you can do that. And we believe that you can essentially pursue any course in life that you can. And that still goes against what's traditionally thought. Most people have low expectations for blind people. They say, well, any kind of education is better than none. And the seeing public, we're either geniuses or we're totally helpless. There's no middle of the road.
Mike, let me ask you this. What obstacles have you had during the past years, especially when you first got involved with this and you're trying to relate to other businesses to let them know that, as you say, I'm just a normal person without any vision? Can you kind of go into that a little bit?
Well, let's say, for example, when I was a customer service rep for Chrysler, and they'd seen blind people read Braille, demonstration, but they never could relate it to their actual telephone customer service work experience. So I was actually showing a guy, that a warranty manager, and he was saying he was seeing me read. I had a dealer directory, and I was able to pull numbers out and read the phone number of the directory. And he said, if the world was set up where you didn't have to read these written pieces of paper that come across my desk, I could make a warranty manager out of you. And I go, I don't know anything about car. I mean, I'm not technical that way. He said, we don't need the warranty people to be technical. They just have to know the warranty codes. They have to know the warranty systems. But see, because he was seeing a person actually apply Braille in regular life, he said, all we would need is you to have access to the information that you need. And I could make you, because, I had a sociology degree, so I was college educated. But I think that the real world doesn't see how blind people use Braille and our technology to live normal life. They just see it as something we do. We demonstrate it, but they can't apply it that I could do their taxes if I was an accountant using those skills. They don't associate it with competence.
Something, Mike, when you were talking, when I hear you talking, a lot of people talking, when we're doing this, it lets me know that this is almost like there's a gap between any disability and what they say as a normal person. And I think because of those that are the visual, the ones that see, they really can't understand that we are normal, that we can do anything that anybody else does. All we have to do is train for it. And that's what you're really bringing across a point now. I wish there was a way that I could get this across to all people, because whenever they see a blind person, they've always stereotyped them with the dark glasses, the cane, or a cup in their hand. But you don't see the ones that's out there, that's in government positions, that's own their own businesses. And on that fact, can you tell me how many blind people are, or give me an idea, that actually own their businesses?
That are actually, you say, working?
Own a business.
I wouldn't have any figures on that, but I would say that, there's 70 to 80% unemployment, but the 30% of the blind people, the 90% of the blind people who work have Braille skills and they have a lot of the skills. So that basically says that those who have had the most training are the ones that who've gotten the better jobs. But as for people who own their own businesses, I wouldn't have
I was just
wouldn't
kind
have
of,
a figure on
curious
that.
about that. We were talking, I was just kind of go a little bit off subject, but we were talking a couple of days ago, and you were talking about some of the recordings, the records, Ben Franklin, and what you were saying how they established that for the blind.
Yeah, because I heard you guys mention audiobooks, and somebody in your interview said, you guys use these audiobooks that are out now. And I said, if a blind person had marketed that concept, we'd be millionaires, because we'd been using audiobooks since the 1930s. Because Thomas Edison, when he originally patented the phonograph, one of the goals he had was to read recorded books for the blind, because a lot of the blind didn't know Braille. Braille had its own revolution going on because there were different types of reading systems, and people weren't really sold on Braille, so they really didn't standardize the one kind of Braille that's used now till like the 1920s or 30s.
Hold on a
But
second. Let me ask.
but
Quick,
anyway, with the talking book, we got a deal with someone contacted RCA from the American Foundation for the Blind, and they were right in the process of developing the long playing records. So blind people got to use them first before they became generally available commercially. And then they put the talking books out at 16 RPM and even at 8 RPM, where we had special machines that we could play the books on. So that started in the 1930s. So the talking book program that's in the libraries today, that was the precursor to like the commercial audio books that you can buy or order from Amazon. But even some of those aren't accessible, because unless you can read the print, you don't necessarily know what disc you're putting in.
That's been a problem that I was discussing. Whenever we get anything for the visually impaired, we have to have a person that can read it to us. Has the Federation ever worked with different companies to try to get them to say, look, if this is for a blind individual, put Braille, or either put a recording on so that we can follow without having a visual person to see it?
Well, I think they're doing more of that now, the later audiobooks that are out now, because they've taken the lead from what the federation's, of course, on the library committees for the Library of Congress, and with the ADA, people are more aware of us using technology like this. So I think people are catching on. But most of us were in Washington. There were a few, and Sheila and Alicia were there in Washington. We're still trying to get them to label medical equipment that blind people can use. See, I think society thinks we all have caregivers, and if I were to call certain people in my life a caregiver, I probably wouldn't be married today. She's saying, but the point is, people think it's easier to give somebody a caregiver than it is to train people. And I said, it's like that old saying: if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach him how to fish, you can feed him for a lifetime. And that's one thing Federation always said. And we always used to say there's no such thing as a free lunch. So I tell blind people, there's training in this state. You got to go out and get that training. You can't just become a competent people. And you can't just become a blind person and demand something. You got to give as good as you get. And that's why we're not a service organization. We tell people you have to be responsible for yourself, and we try to raise the bar for each other and for other blind people, and then for the blindness system, so that they come into realizing that you've got to prepare people to live life, not just cope with blindness.
I like the way you said that. I really do. And I think a lot of blind people don't realize the life they can live. Something you had mentioned, you said there wasn't a standard for Braille at one time.
No, well, there were different types of. See, they thought that blind people had to read, print or represented print letters. And then when Louis Braille invented the 6-dot Braille system, people didn't necessarily like the fact that blind people could read and write to each other, and the teachers couldn't read it. It's kind of like slavery days, where the slave owners didn't like the fact that slaves, it was illegal to teach slaves to read. Well, basically in institutions, in the schools where the blind people were, their teachers that could see didn't like the fact that blind people could write to each other with this code that they didn't know anything about. So they tried to ban it. In fact, some of the students were brailing Bibles, and there was a time that they banned Braille from certain schools, and they actually burnt Braille Bibles that students had people read to them and that they transcribed into a Braille system. So we face that kind of oppression the same way other minorities have faced oppression, because blind people are a people. So, you know, we're just like any other minority. We faced oppression just like other groups that have, you know, that have come into the world. And that's where the difference is. We see blind people as a people. We don't just see ourselves as broken sighted people. And that's where I think the sighted world is wrong, is errors in there.
Let me ask you another question. I know I've heard different stories where the Federation had to come in to for advocacy for certain people, for certain, a lot of their rights. I remember they were talking something about with the Hoover, what is it?
Uber.
Who?
Uber.
Uber. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Uber for dog guys, and that they weren't picking up people with dogs. The drivers wouldn't.
And the Federation had to step in to help with that, didn't they?
Well, we filed a lawsuit, and they promised that they would enforce it. In fact, we're still monitoring it. So in fact, I think we still have that on our website. If you're a dog user and you have an experience, you let us know. In fact, I just was in one of the secret shoppers for a Greyhound. Greyhound used to have a thing where if you couldn't use their website, you could call them on the phone, but they would charge you more if they gave you information on the phone. And we said that was discrimination, because if we can't read the websites, we have to use the phone. So I was a secret shopper for Greyhound. I had to call and book some trips to see if they gave me the discount. And if they didn't, you know, I was supposed to take a note of it and then just say, well, I'll get back to you and check the trip. But most of the Greyhound lines that I called for the 4 trips I booked, they gave me the discount. But for a while there, they were charging blind people more, or anybody more, to call in than to register online for a trip.
Mike, let me ask you this too. Can you tell me any other ways where the Federation has helped blind people where they was having problems? I know the Federation does a lot of things to promote them and to get them to stand on their own.
Well, one of the first things we opened was federal civil service, because there was no way that a blind person could get a federal service job. So that was one of the first things we opened back in the 50s, because a blind guy took the federal service test and he scored high on it. In Michigan, we had an auto mechanic who took the state civil service. That was back in 75 when I joined back in the 70s. And they would give a blind person an automatic score of 70, no matter how high they scored, and keep you on a separate register. So we had to fight that, because blind people were working on cars. Now, I didn't know blind people worked on cars because I'd been blind but when you think about it, either someone taught you how to do it, or if you were a mechanic that went blind and you figured out ways to do it, you could still work on cars. So I've learned through being in the Federation that any job that's out there, there's probably a blind person doing it.
You know, I guess this is where I really want to find out. And I think a lot of the people that's visually impaired or blind, just exactly what can I expect from the Federation? If I become a member here in Michigan, what are my expectations as a member? What am I going to get out of it to help me?
Well, you're going to get out of it what you put into it. We're a working organization, so we're not here to give you anything. We're here to help you help us work, and then we give back to other blind people. So what you're going to do as you participate in committees and learn how we do things, and come to meetings and say, like, for example, if you learn how to walk, if you haven't had any travel training, we'll try to get you in somewhere where you can get training. So you'll start learning to come to your, find the meeting room. You'll learn how to meet people, when we go talk to legislators, you'll learn how to do that. Basically, you get out of it what you put into it. We tell people the best way to learn in the Federation is to get on a committee and start working, and there'll be other people mentoring you. And that's how you're going to learn, because we're blind people advocating for we're advocating for blind people, just like, the NAACP advocates for African Americans and other associations. But we're not a service organization. We don't provide services. Now, there are programs that we have, but we don't just provide services to people and they just receive the services, because there are services out there, but we teach you how to use them effectively, and we teach you how to serve, so you can also give back as well as you give.
Right. And see, I think that's one thing that a lot of blind people, because they don't have the information. And I found out something, when you're part of an organization for a long period of time, you have a tendency to be around other blind people, other ministers, other teachers. And you kind of, a lot of times I think you lose touch with those that's not. So that ordinary person that's looking for something,
Mhm.
you know, how do you have to do a way to bridge that gap and let them know that there are things that you can do. Then a lot of people are really curious about the Federation.
Mhm.
And like I say, I understand you're not going to, not for services, but they really would like to know just how do I get involved in it? And like I said, how does it really help me?
Well, I would tell people the first thing, if I talk to a newly blind person, before you can really become active in the Federation, you need to become in touch with blind skills and you need to go to the training centers. We have a training center in Kalamazoo. We have various training centers where there are agencies for the blind that teach you your skills. And then you join a local chapter of the Federation so that you're in contact with blind people who are actually out there doing things for other blind people. And they'll kind of guide you along and they'll say, well, what classes are they telling you to take? Well, they said, well, they just want me to get this program and then get out of here because they said I got usable vision, so I don't need to learn Braille. I tell them, if you want to learn Braille, you tell them you want to learn Braille because you could lose the rest of that site. So we basically will to guide you if you go through the training system. For example, that's where I first met Sheila. She was at the training center in Kalamazoo before she'd ever heard of the Federation, and she knew there was a Federation in Flint at one time, and she called the Federation, and they called me, and I hooked up with Sheila. But when blind people don't avail themselves of services, they're basically cheating themselves out of something they could be doing.
Well, and that's something too, that there's really not a lot of information out there for blind people. That's something we've been trying to do here in Flint. We've been contacting different businesses and offering to go in and teach the staff how to deal with low vision blind people and also handicapped
Mm-hmm.
people. And so it'd be nice if there was a way we could canvass the state and let them know exactly what's out there for us. You were president for 6 years, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And now you work with the membership drive.
Well, one of the things I'm on is the membership committee, and we're basically coordinating things for our members to make sure our members, who join the organization, that they're involved in a chapter. One of the things we'll be doing is figuring out new areas we want to go, different parts of the state, and start chapters. Because I mean, let's face it, there are some people who don't want to belong to anything. And it's my view, even if you don't want to belong to anything, I would still rather you go get some kind of training, even if you didn't join the Federation, because at some point in time, you may want to come back and meet some other blind people who are doing a little bit more. But the main thing is you've got to get blind skills if you really want to if you want society to give you something, then you've got to be as independent for yourself as you can be, because that's one of our beliefs is that you should do as much for yourself that you possibly can before you ask somebody else to do it for you. Like we hit the same thing with the quiet cars when we wanted to say there has to be a sound that quiet cars make, because people are going to get hit by these cars, and the legislatures were saying, well, no one's been hit by them so far, so you want to wait till people start dying before you do something about it. And our whole thing was, God gave us eyes and he gave us ears, so if you don't see the car, you'll hear it. And I've had seeing people tell me that they've had quiet cars come up behind them that they didn't see right away, and they'd almost gotten hit in different situations. So we went to the legislature and we said there has to be a minimum sound standard for quiet cars. And President Obama signed that in 2009. And everybody told us we couldn't do it, but we even got the Alliance of Automotive Manufacturers on our side. They started to realize, hey, these people know what they're talking about. And see, that's the thing. If people see you being independent, then when you go and tell them the things you need, they're not going to look at you like you're just making demands, like you feel entitled, because they know that you've researched this stuff.
See, that's something I wanted to hear. It's little things that piques the interest of other people. Exactly what's going on with the Federation, something like that. I would have never thought about it. My daughter was hit in Florida a couple of years ago, And I think it was because it was a vehicle, a battery powered vehicle, and she didn't hear it.
Mhm.
I had no idea that y'all had a bill signed so that you would hear, that you were able to hear a battery powered car. And it's things like that when you're discussing those that I think piques the curiosity of blind people to let them know what some of the things that Federation is all about. How many chapters are there in Michigan?
Well, let's see. We have the Jackson chapter. We have the Kalamazoo. We have Jackson. We have Detroit. We have about five really active ones right now, I would say, and we're in the process of having some events. We're going to have an event in Flint to educate, to do some youth training and developing. Because if we have some events that we're able to sponsor in conjunction with, say, the school systems, then we could get some interest and get some people to come you know, get involved in our organization also. So we're really, because see, we're all volunteers. We don't get any grants, or we don't get any money. So any money we get, we raise ourselves. So that's why you'll see us do fundraising. And that's another thing, blind people say, well, how can I be in an organization? I can't fundraise. I've sold tickets to things. You can learn how to do things, and that forces you to come out of that comfort zone, come out of that bedroom or wherever you stay and reading your books and stuff, and really get you out and say you can learn how to do things like other organizations have, walkathons, bikeathons, whatever kind of event you want. We can do the same thing.
So I just out of curious, what events have you been involved in? Have you done any hiking or anything like that where you,
I've been in walkathons. We had a walkathon in well, we had a big walkathon in when we were in Atlanta, Georgia, before our convention. And when we had our 2009 convention here, we had a walkathon. And well, actually, John Lewis was at the walkathon in Georgia, and he talked to us all about trouble. And you know how he told he says make trouble. And
yeah.
unfortunately, when he passed away, and I went and talked to the Secretary of State and tell her we want accessible voting, she's telling me how much she liked John Lewis. And I said, well, if John Lewis was here, he wouldn't be on your side, he'd be on our side, because we want accessible voting. And you guys say you want it for us too, but everybody says wait. Well, like Martin Luther King says, we're tired of waiting. We've been waiting. I mean, I'm 69 years old, and I've known Braille all my life. And when I was growing up, people told me if you apply yourself and you work hard, you could have the American dream. And I'm not saying that it didn't have things. I've been blessed living here, but there are a lot of things we had to fight for that you think if someone had an education, they shouldn't have to fight for the ability to read a menu in a restaurant.
that is what you're saying is so true. When you talk about rights, I mentioned this before. I think there was one time that a blind person wasn't allowed on a plane with a cane.
They would take your cane away from us because they thought it was like handicapped people. There was even a time if you were on the street and you were walking on the street, a cop could come up to you and take you home. We weren't even allowed to walk the streets. If somebody saw and say, hey, there's a blind guy down there, they always think we're trying to go somewhere. Well, we don't try to go somewhere. A lot of times we know what street we're on. We know what street we're turning on, and we know what street we're going to cross. But there was a time they could literally take you off the street. So we had to fight for white cane laws so that blind people could carry canes and could travel independently without someone telling them, but they had to have somebody with them.
That's something. That word independently. That word resonates a lot with blind people, and that's the thing that they seem like they fight for each and every day, just to be heard and let them know I'm capable, I'm able to do these things. And I think that's one thing that I've seen with the Federation for the Blindness is really, it's helped me and other blind people. And so, since you've been there, have you seen a difference in the way blind people are that's with the Federation?
I see that are in the Federation, they have a zest for life. They're always looking for new ways to do things. When you go to a convention and you see someone show you a device that they use or that they've discovered or that they developed, you see people who are really, really engaged with finding ways to do things as a blind person. So we have a passion for that. We're not waiting for somebody to come up and invent something. For example, we had to fight with Apple to get accessible phones. For a long time, Apple said there was no way that we would have to have a special phone made for us. So it took a couple of lawsuits, and it took a couple of, from what I hear, there was an Apple employee that had a blind son, and he went up to Steve Jobs, I guess, and said, I want to make this phone so my son can use it. And they said, well, we don't have time for that. And he goes, well, I guess you don't have time for me as an employee. Well, I guess they let him do it because they couldn't afford to lose the guy. But sometimes it takes something like that to say, hey, we need to have access to this stuff. And now the iPhone's accessible right out of the box. Whereas at one time, all these companies said, well, you've got special companies that make stuff for you guys. We don't need to do it for you.
And that's, there's another thing where we have to, and it takes those visually impaired and blind people that has the courage to stand up and fight. Because if we just sit there, people will walk right past us. They'll try to, as you say, give us caregivers. We don't want caregivers. We want to be able to give for our own self. We want to be able to take care of ourselves. And it seems like society, for some reason, has got in the back of their minds that we shouldn't be out there. And it's like with you, I'm listening to what you're saying and the time that you've been in this organization and the different things that you've had to go through. And sometimes I can hear it by talking in the past, it kind of irritates you because of what you've had to go through. You're saying, look, I'm a human, I'm normal, I can do these things. Have you felt like that before?
I have, but it's, this is the best country in the world to live in if you're gonna do things, but that doesn't mean we just be grateful for what we get, because I look on any success that we get, that allows us to be able to give more to other people, including the people that are giving us the stuff. If you can make us valuable, that's less people getting aid. That's more people paying taxes. That's more people working. For example, when I got my first job in Chrysler customer service, and I was reading a talking book one time, and those books for the blind are paid for by the government. And I read the page that said, this is provided by the Library of Congress for solely for the use of the blind and physically handicapped. It occurred to me that now that I'm paying taxes, I'm helping to pay for the services that I've been benefiting from all these years. And that was a good feeling to have.
It kept in mind. You worked for Chrysler.
Yeah, I did.
How many years?
I was there 2 years, and then they did the big layoff. I was one of the first people they tried in customer service work, and that was even before they had computer technology. But they wanted to try. That was back in the late 70s, where people were into experimenting and trying different things.
No, I didn't know if you retired from Chrysler or what. I was just wondering what.
Well, I retired from EDS actually, which was General Motors technical support.
What is EDS?
EDS was Electronic Data Systems. Ross Perot ran the company for a while. I remember you were familiar with him.
Yes. And
they did all of General Motors technical support and customer support work, and they also did it for other companies. Well, they hired blind people in their customer service. I worked at the Chevrolet Customer Assistance Center, and that was right about the time I went to the agency for the blind and said, because I was playing music full time, play piano and sing. And I was working, and I said, I want to learn this new technology that blind people are using. And the only way I was going to learn it was to go back to the agency for the blind and said, I want to diversify a little bit and get some more skills. Well, since I'd had a track record and I was already working, even if it was on my own, self-employed, they said I was a good risk. So they took me back into the system, and then I learned some computer skills, and I worked for EDS for 9 years till they offered me a retirement. Anybody over 50, they offered a retirement, because they lost a couple of contracts, that they're owned by Hewlett Packard now. The EDS really doesn't exist anymore.
I guess the reason I was asking that, because you were talking about independency and the things that we go through, and we're sitting here listening to someone that's been through that, and have had to fight their way. They had to stand up and let them know, hey, I can do these things just with training. So just by listening and talking to you, people can say, well, hey, if he did it, I can do it too. And all this to me makes me say, this is what the National Federation for the Blind is for. Because
it's of the blind, by the way. Yeah, just make sure you say of the blind, because that way people know it's of us, not for us. So
I'm
that's what
sorry.
that's what we always say.
Yeah, I did that. Someone lectured me on that before. That was a Freudian slip, I guess.
That's okay.
But no, it is Federation of the Blind. And but like I said, but I think because of what you're saying and people are able to hear and see that you actually went through all this and you've been in it for so long, how it's improved your life and helped you. And matter of fact, how you've been able to help other people. And you're the first person that I contacted about the Federation of the Blind. So
That's right.
yeah, because of you, that's why I'm here now.
Yeah, I remember you calling me and then you told me about the wrestling thing you were doing, and then we just started hooking up. Yeah.
And it worked out pretty good. So is there anything that you would like to say about the Federation of the Blind to encourage people or just to let them know, to kind of sum it up, what's it all about? And
Well, I would say that whatever age you are, it's never too late to take control of your life, and you will meet blind people from all walks of life. Some are new to blindness and they're learning. Some have been blind for a long time and they're still learning things, but they're also teaching things. So I said, if blindness is a part of your life, you need to connect with other blind people who are out there trying to make a difference in the world to change things for all blind people and educate the sighted world that blindness is not a dead end, it's a live option.
well, I just one quick, how has the Federation changed your life?
Well, I guess it made me raise the bar in terms of, I figured once I got a job and I would work, and I would do it. It made me want to do more. For example, I was always thought independence was if somebody shows me my route to work and I know what buses I'm going to take. With the Federation, I'm more likely to take risks now and go somewhere where I've never been and kind of figure out where I am if I have to on the fly. Whereas uh, for example, I left the house one time, took a Uber to the airport, took the airplane to Baltimore, went to a seminar there, then went to Washington, D.C., where we hooked up and we went and visited all the representatives, came home, took the Uber back home, and my wife didn't have anything to do with it as far as driving me or anything. And she's always been supportive of me. She's driven me places and things, but this was the first time I never pictured that I would go somewhere where I'd never been before, totally on my own and kind of figure out what I needed to do. And are there times I got help? Of course there are, just like seeing people get help when they need it. But the point is, I had the skills to go out there and I had the confidence because I'd been with other Federation people. You go somewhere with a group of blind people who are used to traveling, and you'll get more confidence by traveling with them than you'll get just one-on-one with an instructor. Not to say that one-on-one with an instructor isn't good, but when you hang out with other blind people and you go somewhere that you always wanted to go, even if it's just to a restaurant or something. I had a sighted lady drive me to we went down to the Capitol to have this Braille proclamation, and she read it, and and all these blind people, they were going to go to this restaurant. She didn't know where it was, so she followed them. And I said, did you ever think that you'd be guided to a restaurant by blind people? She goes, no, I never thought of it, but they know where they're going, so that's okay for me,
You know, that is when you said that we were down at Kalamazoo at one of the meetings, and I could see a lot more than what I could now. And I was following about 5 or 6 other blind people to the restaurant, and I was amazed at it. And speaking about traveling, there is a lot of traveling that the Federation of the Blind does for conferences and all types of stuff. And that was something that really stuck out with me. And I'm saying, who's taking you around? They said, what do you mean? Who? It's us.
Yeah, and sometimes you do have people take you. I mean, I've had people drive me. I've had people go into meetings with me to act as an assistant or whatever, just like a seeing person. In fact, when I was at Chrysler, I'll never forget the day someone said, well, Lee Iacocca is going to come out and do this speech, and he's got a driver, and his driver, I said, he's got a what? They go, he's got a driver. It never occurred to me, those guys. I said, well, if he can have a driver and people drive him around, and when he goes to give a speech, some guy comes in there, scopes the area out for him. I said, technically, there's nothing saying a blind person couldn't be president of an automotive company, is there? And the guy said, no, technically, you're absolutely right. When you have an executive position, you have people do a lot of that legwork for you, and you show up, and they'll escort you to the podium and do whatever they have to do. Like, if you have a senator, they always have an assistant with them.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of Sheila, our president. She's got a lot of stuff to do, but she knows how to delegate things. So I think sometimes I think she would like to sit back and just kind of give orders, but she's out there on the front line just like you. Felicia,
Yes.
speaking of different things that's coming up, we got this gala event. You're going to be there, right, Mike?
Yeah, well, I should be around then. Yeah.
So can you kind of tell us a little bit about this gala that's happening?
I sure can. It's going to be one of our biggest events for this year. It's scheduled to go on June 24th, 2023, between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. And it's a formal affair. And the main thing about our gala is we're reaching out to family. And this gala here will open up a lot of doors of what the National Federation of the Blind Flint Genesee Chapter does. And it's to raise awareness, raise resources and funds for the family. Our main motto for this year is family and young people. And so this gala will present all of that, including, I'm not going to give all of the information out today until we're ready, but we have a guest that is well known around the world that's supporting us.
I'm here
at this gala. Well, it's not you. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
okay,
I hate
okay.
to hurt your feelings and all of that. But it's not you. Okay.
All
But-
right, the song.
What was that?
What's that?
I'm sorry. That was our beloved president was telling us something. We wanted to make sure that we got it. But also, we're having a picnic.
That'll be at the end of July. We had our first picnic last July, and this will be our second annual picnic. And that's also geared towards family. And that'll be out at the UAW Union City Park, which is out on Torrey Road, towards the end of July. And we'll be advertising this more as the time goes on. But anybody is welcome to come out and fellowship with us. Get to know what we do, and we can do a lot. We just do things differently. That's all.
And you know something, these events that's been going on, they've been encouraging me. It really has. And a lot of times, if we could just get the parents, brothers, sisters of blind kids out, then they can see what's out there. And then we can introduce them to the Federation of the Blind and let them know what activities that we have and the events that we have, and people like you to encourage each and every one of us. So, Mike, we're going to get ready to wrap this up. You would just like to say?
I would say, come help us build the Federation. If you think you have an idea of what we should be doing different or something, we need your ideas. We need your experience. We need your hands. We need the points of view of all blind people from all walks of life, whether you're new to blindness or, have been around for a while. Just remember, we're here to work for the bigger picture, which is helping each other, helping the blind help themselves, and then reaching out to other people and educating the seeing world that blind people can live the life they want, provided they get the proper training and they get the proper opportunity.
Mike, I want to thank you so much for your time and especially all the information and what you've told us today. I really enjoyed this, and I think everybody here will agree with me that you're quite a special guy.
Thanks. I'm not that extraordinary, but that's the point. I made my mistakes in life just like everybody, but I've learned not to take. That's one thing the Federation, like you said, what did it teach me? Not to take myself too seriously or be self-conscious. You make a mistake, everybody makes mistakes, even real professional. I used to think seeing people didn't make mistakes, but all you got to do is drive with someone that can see. And they'll tell you there's plenty of drivers making mistakes all the time.
I had a kid ask me. He said, "Does visual people run into poles?" I said, "Every day." So so I just want to add to this too is that the Federation of the Blind not only takes blind people, but we also take visual people that want to help. So it's an open door for anyone and everyone.
That's correct.
And again, I'd like to say thank you, Mike.
Well, thanks for letting me come to the interview. I should have come down there with you today, but
Well,
that was okay the way we did it.
since you said that, you can come back and be here in person, okay?
Yeah,
And we'll see if we can go for donuts and coffee, or donuts and apple cider.
yeah, we'll go get the bunchki.
There you go. That's all right too. All right, and thank you again.